A 10-year-long wait for India has ended. Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar has been listed as a global terrorist by the United Nations. It's a major diplomatic victory for India. Masood Azhar is the man behind some of the worst terror attacks on Indian soil. This includes the attack on the Indian Parliament, the Uri attack and the recent Pulwama attack. Today, the United Nations sanctions list has Masood Azhar's name on it. India has welcomed the decision. New Delhi says that this is a step in the right direction.
I can confirm to you, just a short while ago, the chairperson of the UN Sanctions Committee, the permanent representative of Indonesia, has informed us that Masood Azhar stands designated as an individual who has been promoting terrorism globally. I'm grateful to the many countries who were supportive of this effort. The designating states, that is USA, UK and France. Also several others within the Council and outside the Council who came forward without any restraints and supported this Indian effort at not tolerating a terrorist.
India's efforts to get Masood Azhar listed at the UN began in 2009. There were multiple resolutions against him. The first in 2009, then in 2016, then again in 2017. The latest effort was made last month after the Pulwama attack. China had blocked his listing as a global terrorist every time. The official term they use is a technical hold. Today, China has lifted that technical hold. The pressure on Beijing has been immense. Last month, the US, the UK and France had pushed a fresh proposal to designate Masood Azhar. This was within days of the Pulwama attack. Every country that is part of the Security Council supported this move except China. But today, it did not raise any objections. Masood Azhar is now a terrorist in the eyes and in the record books of the United Nations. All members of the UN must now implement 3 measures. First, they must freeze the assets of Masood Azhar. Second, impose a travel ban on him. And third, slap an embargo, arms embargo on him, all United Nations members, including Pakistan. So what led to this change of heart in China? Why did China, after 10 long years, change its position on Masood Azhar? Let's bring you the inside story. The key to this success is diplomacy and persistence. It took some intense diplomatic negotiation on India's part to push this through. Last week, Foreign Secretary Vijay Gokhale had travelled to China. He is said to have given more evidence against Jaish-e-Mohammed. Detailed representations were also made at the United Nations. Here is what China has said, and I'm quoting. Recently, relevant countries revised and resubmitted the materials for the listing proposal to the 1267 committee. After careful study of the revised materials and taking into consideration the opinions of relevant parties concerned, China does not have objection to the listing proposal. Obviously, it's a bitter pill to swallow for Pakistan. Soon after Masood Azhar was listed, Islamabad attempted a face-saver before the press. They did not have much to say. France, which has been relentlessly pushing for this listing, issued a statement too. France is the only P5 member so far to link the action against Masood Azhar to the terror attack in Pulwama. It is important to note that Azhar was once in Indian custody. 20 years back, he was released by India. That's when his group had hijacked Air India flight IC814. The year was 1999. The Indian government buckled under pressure. The lives of more than 180 people were on the line. India was forced to let go of Masood Azhar, and India has been paying a heavy price for it. The Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, spoke about this just a short while back when he was campaigning in Rajasthan. Listen in.
मसूद अजहर को संयुक्त राष्ट्र द्वारा आतंकवादी घोषित करने पर आखिरकार विश्व में सहमति बनी, यह संतोष का विषय है। देर आए दुरुस्त आए। आतंकवाद के खिलाफ संघर्ष में और आतंकवाद को जड़ से उखाड़ने के लिए लंबे समय से भारत जो प्रयास कर रहा था, ये उसकी बहुत बड़ी सफलता है।
We have with us a copy of the dossier that the government of India prepared on this, and this dossier lays bare the details of Masood Azhar's involvement in India over the last 2 decades, complete with a family tree and what every member of the Azhar family has been involved in. They've called Jaish-e-Mohammed a family enterprise. A relevant portion of the dossier reads, and I quote, Masood Azhar has intensified his terrorist operations against the Indian government, security forces and civilians, predominantly in Jammu and Kashmir. He's also broadened the Jaish-e-Mohammed's operational focus by joining the Afghan Taliban in attacks against the government and coalition forces in Afghanistan. The dossier also dwells on terror funding by Masood Azhar and his group. It says that the sole purpose of the fundraising campaigns is to financially support jihad in Kashmir and in Afghanistan. With me is G. Parthasarathy, former High Commissioner of India to Pakistan. With me in the studio here. Good evening, sir. Also, Ray Locker, senior journalist, joining us from Washington, D.C. and Ainar Thangan, political and economic commentator with us from Beijing. Good evening to all of you and welcome to the show. Let me begin with you. How big a win, according to you, this is for India?
Well, I think it's been an exercise of persistence, because China found itself in a position where of the 15 members, 3 of the 4 permanent members were willing to sponsor a resolution, and Russia was saying that it would not sponsor, was willing to back a resolution declaring him. So China was totally isolated. It did not want this to go to the main Security Council, which the Americans, the French and the British were threatening to take it to, and which Germany would have joined in. So I think rather than allowing that, they found a face-saving way out to take it back to the Terrorism Committee, which under the UN resolution on terror, which does not become one of public discussion, and agree there to this. So China has played its cards in that manner. Another point one has to mention is, I think China also realizes that it's losing friends across Asia. Indonesia is a member of the UN Security Council and is going to go against them in this. They have problems with Indonesia. They have problems across Asia. And when all this is happening, especially on maritime matters, you have the Indian fleet visiting China, the foreign secretary being there, and there were good discussions between Mr. Modi and President Xi Jinping. So they do see trade, other issues. So while they are not going to give up on Pakistan, because Pakistan will remain a part of a low price containment of India as an ally, that will continue. This was one thing they felt they could dump, and there's precious little Pakistan would do about it. And it saves them the embarrassment and a brownie point with India. So that is the Chinese reasoning, good enough. But it does, as far as we are concerned, I personally believe that the others were pushed to do this after the Balakot air attack, because they realized, led by the French, that in response to Pulwama, India is now up an escalation ladder and is willing to cross previous red lines and grow across the line of control.
Ainar Thangan, would you agree with this, that China wasn't really left with much of a choice and it decided to offset the larger diplomatic cost by disposing of Masood Azhar?
No, I don't think so. I've heard your guest. I think he has perhaps a biased view of the India-China relation. I prefer to see it as something very much more positive. If India and China get together, it will be an Asian-centric. If it is something where they're pushed apart and they're pitted against each other, it'll be just another colonial win. The fact is, earlier last week, there was discussion about India and China coming together to try to stabilize the world energy and oil prices, especially since they are the largest importers of this. So there are great opportunities in trade and in influence in trying to settle these types of matters. I believe it was the Wuhan spirit, the triumph for Modi and Xi, able to bring their countries together. The technical hold that was done in March was simply a way in which China could give Pakistan a little bit of time to get their house in order vis-a-vis what was inevitably about to happen. The fact that the Indian minister was able to deliver more proof was the straw that broke the camel's back made it clear that China would act. Remember, China is the one pushing the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization.
I don't know.
That is against terrorism.
Who was trying to get its house in order, and would this not be an admission? Would this amount to an admission by China that they erred in shielding him for all these years?
Well, absolutely. Well, absolutely, because the Chinese, let's face it, China is got with CPEC, with Gwadar. Pakistan is a strategic asset to China.
And it is an instrument
of low-cost containment. But having said that, China also recognizes that relations with India are important. And in this particular case, it was outnumbered 14-1 in the Security Council. So what's in it for them? Including Indonesia, which is the president, which is another country with whom it has a maritime boundary dispute. So, yes, it is good for the Chinese-Indian relationship, and if they notice, we have responded very positively. The Indian fleet was there in Chinese ports for joint exercises with China. So, we've made it very clear that we're willing to look ahead. But does that mean it's going to end China's policy of low-cost containment? I doubt it. But it is good that we are finding complementarities and we are finding ways to work together. But I'm not going to be jumping with joy about this. It is China being realistic.
It is China being realistic. Ray Locker, I want to bring you in here. This is a commendable effort, some would say, world past for once standing firm on an issue that had to be dealt with. And there was pressure on China, as Mr. Parthasarathy here has said. And Washington has been at the forefront of this effort. Would you say that this is the beginning of many such steps that need to be taken to ensure that terrorism emanating from Pakistan is contained and finally rooted out?
Well, Palke, I think that's exactly right. I mean, it's a first step. There's really no real loss to China in taking this step. I mean, Masood Azhar has been a thorn in everyone's side for a long time. And finally, I think China realized how much more evidence do they need to see that he's behind a number of terrorist attacks, including the one in February. The whole world was aligned against China on this, and they said, what's in it for us to keep protecting this guy? So they dropped him. And looking long term, China's interests are far better aligned with India's than with Pakistan. The potential of trade between those two countries is immense, and it could turn the focus on what happens in the rest of the century toward China and India, which I think would be beneficial to both countries.
Ainar Thangan, does this also have anything to do with the fact that India, for the second time in 3 years, has boycotted the Belt and Road Summit in Beijing, and also a message, a signal perhaps from China to Pakistan that yes, we remain allies, we remain partners, but there will be no cooperation on terrorism?
Well, I don't think there'd be any cooperation on terrorism. The whole point of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization is to get rid of terrorism, to share resources, to do away with it. Pakistan has unique challenges in that they have the most number of terrorist groups, quote, being harbored, according to the UN. And this is a matter of concern not only to China, Russia, India, and others, but this talk of low-cost containment is simply chatter. The fact is that China, as a previous guest said, has a lot more to gain from a good relationship with India, two largest by population countries, the two fastest growing large economies. This is a market that if they come together, it'll be virtually unstoppable. So I can't believe that anyone actually thinks that China is trying to contain India. They see that India is oftentimes trying to be used by other powers, the U.S. in particular, as a doorstop to China. So at this point, I think it's better that these two countries cooperate.
Right. You'd be surprised how many people believe that China is trying to contain India, and India does not have to be guided by any other power. Let me say, India has its own policy and a policy of strategic independence.
I mean, if it is not, they are the ones. China provides Pakistan designs of nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles in violation of the MTCR to hit every city in India. The latest Pakistani nuclear weapons for tactical ones, plutonium, the plutonium facilities were provided by China. Now, if that is not low-cost containment, I don't know what is.
Aina, do you want to respond?
Yeah, the nuclear issue has been around for quite some time. This is not something that's happened in the past month. So as far as things, I mean, if you don't like China and you want to treat China as an enemy, I guess that is up to you. I don't know that it will benefit India in any particular way. I think China has signaled quite clearly, not only on this issue, but on other issues, that it will not go along with any kind of backsliding. They have cut off a number of projects along the corridor that they have put a lot of money in simply because Pakistan has not been able to fulfill its side of the bargain. China is in a position where it would like regional peace. I think India feels the same way. So the issue here is how do you arrive at it rather than throwing stones and bricks and mud.
I think both sides need regional peace, and they realize that the peace is being hampered or disrupted by a particular country, which China has been supporting, and that is all there is to it. Ray Locker, I want to ask you this. Some are saying that this is not such a big deal. Hafiz Saeed has been designated as a global terrorist, but he operates with impunity in Pakistan. So what if another man has also been put on this UN sanctions list? Does it change anything? Does it change the ground reality of Pakistan?
Well, it doesn't change anything immediately, but nothing like this changes anything immediately. It's always a first step. And these things accumulate. Yeah. So one person gets on a sanctions list, then you glean information from those sanctions and whatever financial transactions you're tracking. That leads to other people. It accumulates over and over and over again. So after a few years, you have a much better picture of terrorist financing and how all of that works. And it benefits everybody. So the thread that you pull on with Masood Azhar, leads you to other people. And that's always a beneficial relationship with all the parties involved. And I think that helps China, which has its own issues with Islamic terrorism, as well as India. And I think those two countries, despite their long history of antagonism, have finally realized they have an opportunity to create an economic powerhouse in the region and in the world. And why are they letting this one guy get in their way?
Right. I want you to respond to this also. Help our viewers understand what is this whole talk of delinking this from Pulwama, of dropping a reference to terrorism in Kashmir. Do we still have to give concessions and face savers to Pakistan, or is this the nature of diplomacy?
No. I think let's be clear. I go along with Mr. Locker. I think it's a step forward. And that started with Mr. Modi's visit to Wuhan. It's followed up by Foreign Secretary Gokhale's visit. It's followed up by our fleet exercising with the Chinese, which is something. But I look at it as incremental. Let's be very, very clear. Yes, we can improve and we should improve relations with China. Yes, we should find areas of cooperation. But it is not just India. It is India, it is Indonesia, it is Malaysia, it is the Philippines, it is Japan, it is South Korea. Everyone is finding the Chinese are flexing their muscles. And therefore, we also need to have our get-togethers. And I think the Americans have been very helpful in this thing. But it's not just America. In this particular case, the president of the UN Security Council is Indonesia. They were the ones who backed us to the hilt. The Security Council.
Right, and I have to ask you this. We are in the middle of an election season. Everything that happens has political implications. So the opposition parties in India are speaking about this because this is a victory, symbolic, but a victory for India. But they are saying, congratulations, Sushma Swaraj. Congratulations, India's diplomats. They're not congratulating perhaps the man who deserves the congratulations. Would you say it is Prime Minister Modi's win?
Mercifully, I've spent a lifetime not in politics, but in diplomacy and in strategic issues. So as far as I'm concerned, I mean, you see today in the United States, Trump dealing with the Democrats. This is a part of democratic politics. And I'm happy that there is lively debate. Yes, the government will do it. Yes, the opposition will oppose it. And ultimately, the people of India will decide, and I'm sure they'll make the right choice.
I'm asking you, whose win do you think this is?
It's a win for India, I would say.
It's a win for India. That's a good answer. Aina Thangan, Ray Locker, thanks very much for joining us and for sharing your thoughts with us here. So the question is, what does this listing really mean? Is this a decision? Is finally action being taken against Masood Azhar, or is this another development in a series of developments? It is being hailed as a major diplomatic victory for India, and this is what this listing means. 1, Masood Azhar will be put under a travel ban. 2, an arms embargo. Now let's take this one by one. What does a travel ban do? A travel ban prevents the entry of Masood Azhar into or prevents his transit by all states under the United Nations umbrella. Under an arms embargo, no state should supply, sell or transfer arms or any related materials to the designated individuals and organizations, in this case Masood Azhar. And 3, there will be an assets freeze. What does that do? According to the United Nations Sanctions Committee, all states should freeze the funds and other financial assets of the designated individuals and entities. The Jaish-e-Mohammed is already a proscribed organization. Now Masood Azhar is also proscribed. He cannot get access to any asset through any channel. At least that's what the rule book says. Violation of that would be a violation of the United Nations Security Council, which means that India's efforts have yielded results after many attempts. As I said, the proposal that France, the UK and the US moved on the 27th of February was the 4th such proposal against Masood Azhar in the last decade alone. For those who say this listing is symbolic, here's an analysis. 1, it shows the world that India will take terror head-on and pursue a strong response to global terrorists like Masood Azhar. 2, India can play the diplomatic waiting game. While the government retaliated to the Pulwama attacks or the Balakot airstrikes on the one hand, it has also brought a global consensus. 3, the listing of Masood Azhar demonstrates what a decisive government with a political will can achieve. Coming at a time like this, when the region has been rocked by another terrorist attack in Sri Lanka, India's diplomacy is a blueprint, some would say, for other countries to pursue a strong response to global terror. That's as far as the net impact of the listing goes. The issue also proves several other points. India has made these points at various global forums, including the United Nations, in the past. India has called out Pakistan's collusion with various terrorist and extremist organizations for years. Masood Azhar himself is often referred to as a blue-eyed boy of the ISI. This listing is a vindication of India's stand then on Jaish-e-Mohammed and its chief, and indeed the country of Pakistan, the government of Pakistan. It also vindicates or proves India's growing stature as a country. It was only that held this listing up for so long. Now, China's acceptance to remove the technical hold tells us that Beijing needs India more than ever. Despite China's involvement with Pakistan, it has finally backed India on this issue, a very crucial issue for Pakistan as well. Several reports over the past few months said that Masood Azhar was crucial to protecting Chinese laborers involved in many infrastructure projects in Pakistan. They did not want to be on the wrong side of this man. This list shows that Beijing has prioritized good relations with India over its interests in Pakistan. It's also a major victory for the Modi government. At a domestic level, the government has demonstrated action against terrorists, wherever they may be. At an international level, the Indian government has brought a consensus on terrorists and terrorism, and that is why this listing is a very significant development. Now to the other big story we're tracking, Venezuela. It has been at the center of the world's attention. On Tuesday, Juan Guaido attempted a bold move. He tried to launch a coup. He failed. Dozens of National Guardsmen were on his side. Guaido called on the military to turn against President Nicolás Maduro.
Un gran llamado a los empleados públicos y a un componente fundamental, no solamente para la transición, sino para la reconstrucción de Venezuela, recuperar soberanía nacional, nuestras Fuerzas Armadas. Hoy, valientes soldados, valientes patriotas, valientes hombres apegados a la Constitución han acudido a nuestro llamado. Hemos acudido también al llamado. Nos hemos encontrado definitivamente en las calles de Venezuela.
Soon clashes erupted on the streets. More than 100 people were injured. Supporters from both the sides gathered in different places across the capital, Caracas. Armed military vehicles were deployed to contain them. Dramatic pictures beamed across television sets around the world. A military truck tried to run over protesters.
Mierda, marico. Uf.
Ultimately, it wasn't enough. Maduro announced that the coup has been defeated. His defense minister appeared before the media.
Rechazamos también esa maniobra de campaña psicológica contra Venezuela. Así pues que el llamado al pueblo de Venezuela es a la calma, a la sensatez. No hay ninguna situación que ponga en peligro la institucionalidad y la democracia en Venezuela en este momento. Ese intento burdo, ese intento inútil que acaban de hacer nuevamente algunos compañeros captados por la ultraderecha venezolana, bueno, han hecho el ridículo nuevamente y esto nos va a fortalecer. Y esto nos fortalece día.
This was the most violent episode of the Venezuelan political crisis so far, but it is clear that the armed forces are now divided. The crisis has deepened. While the top brass of the military still supports Maduro, the soldiers are willing to defy their commanders. We spoke earlier to our correspondent Carlos Rivas Lamas in Caracas.
Tensions continue to escalate in Venezuela as both sides here in the country called on their supporters to take to the streets today in Caracas and across the country. Self-declared interim president of Venezuela, Juan Guaidó, has said Operation Freedom must continue and called once again on Venezuelan militaries to topple the leftist government of President Nicolás Maduro. The Venezuelan opposition has said the time has come to restore democracy and that they must remain in the streets until that happens. U.S. Secretary of State has said U.S. military intervention in Venezuela possible and that all options on the table, although he said the U.S., as the rest of countries which support Juan Guaidó, are seeking a peaceful transition of power in Venezuela through free and fair elections. President Nicolás Maduro denied U.S. accusation that he was leaving Venezuela on Tuesday and said that 8 Venezuelan militaries were injured during clashes between security forces and opposition demonstrators. Countries like Bolivia, Turkey, Russia and Cuba has shown their support to President Nicolás Maduro and rejected Venezuelan opposition's plans to overthrow him. Today, government supporters will rally in support of President Nicolás Maduro.
Even as opposition leader Juan Guaidó mounts this final offensive, all eyes are on one man, President Nicolás Maduro. Will he or won't he cave in and cede power? One way of understanding that is to ask, who is this man? Our next report wraps all that up, all that you need to know about the president of Venezuela, Nicolás Maduro.
Nicolás Maduro was born in Venezuela's capital, Caracas, into a working-class family. This former bus driver began his political career as a trade unionist. A strong supporter of former President Hugo Chavez, he was first elected to the National Assembly in the year 2000.
Nuevo vicepresidente que es Nicolás Maduro.
He served 6 years as foreign minister, and at the time he had a rather dull image. Never to divert from President Chavez's line. He denounced US foreign policy and cultivated allies in emerging markets such as Russia and China. In October 2012, Maduro was named vice president, and then Chavez's handpicked successor 2 months later. As Chavez's illness worsened, Maduro became the de facto leader. He became acting president of Venezuela in March 2013, 3 days after the death of Chavez. Maduro, the ruling Socialist Party's candidate, won the controversial presidential election, but only by a very narrow margin. The opposition candidates even refused to recognize the election result. There were allegations of thousands of voting irregularities. Despite that, Maduro was sworn in. And he largely continued Chavez's policies, including nationalizations, tight state control of the economy, and financial support for allies such as communist-led Cuba. Like Chavez, Maduro too has a penchant for extreme rhetoric. He has accused enemies of plotting to assassinate him. In March this year, Maduro said that far-right figures in the United States were plotting to kill him. Maduro is married to Celia Flores, a former leader of the National Assembly, and the two have long been viewed as a power couple in the government. Maduro was raised a Roman Catholic, but he and his wife are supporters of the late Indian spiritual guru Sai Baba. Spirituality aside, trouble for Maduro started brewing almost immediately after he became president. In 2014, Venezuela's economy entered a recession, triggered by a fall in crude oil prices. The oil-rich nation topped the global misery index for 2 consecutive years, and inflation spiraled up to unimaginably high levels. Venezuela was mired in deep economic crisis despite its vast oil reserves. Shortages of food and medicine have prompted more than 3 million Venezuelans to move out in recent years. In fact, it was the dire state of the economy that sparked off the first citizen protests. While a few left-leaning governments in the region like Cuba and Bolivia continue to back Maduro, other pro-US neighbors like Brazil and Colombia want Maduro out. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Since he proclaimed himself the president on the 23rd of January this year, Juan Guaido has rallied to remove President Nicolas Maduro. Emerging from obscurity to presidency, he proves to be the biggest threat to the current president. With the backing of more than 50 nations, Juan Guaido aims to overthrow Maduro and bring back what he calls normalcy in Venezuela.
Quienes estén de acuerdo con esa elección, favor expresarlo con la señal de costumbre. Aprobado. El diputado Juan Guaidó, a consideración.
The sun was coming up as Juan Guaido announced the final phase of the effort to end Maduro's disastrous rule.
Our armed forces today, brave soldiers, brave patriots, attached to the Constitution, have come to our call. We have also come to the call. We have definitely found ourselves in the streets of Venezuela. Operation Freedom, the Committee of Aid. I invite you immediately to cover the streets of Venezuela. The 1st of May began today. The definitive cessation of the usurpation began today.
This is the most serious threat Juan Guaido has posed on the Maduro regime. Standing alongside a group of soldiers and his political mentor Leopoldo Lopez, Guaido called for Operation Freedom.
The call to the few soldiers that due to persecution and harassment have not finished making the step. We are here today and we will resist today, urging those soldiers to join in this legitimate fight of all Venezuela.
Since declaring himself interim president in January, Guaido has repeatedly made overtures to the military to join him. Several hundred soldiers have defected and left the country in recent weeks, though the numbers have not been high enough to threaten Maduro's grip. But now there are signs that Venezuelan military defections may be rising, with defected soldiers urging other military members to join them.
The military officers who decided since February 22-23 to cross to the right side, well, they've always been on the side of the Constitution, wholly supporting our Commander-in-Chief, Juan Guaido, the real president people want in Venezuela.
While Guaido is recognized by more than 50 nations as Venezuela's rightful leader, Maduro still has powerful backers, notably Russia, China, Turkey and few more. The United States recognized Guaido shortly after he assumed the interim presidency and has been one of the most vocal international supporters.
Support the people of Venezuela. We're sad that they have been starved by Maduro. They've been denied food and medicine and basic humanitarian needs having been met. The United States has gotten supplies there to them. Sometimes those have been obstructed or burned. But we stand with the people of Venezuela and we stand with Juan Guaido. Maduro has to go. We've made that very clear for a number of years. The we is the President, the Vice President, the Secretary of State, Ambassador Bolton.
U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that the United States was prepared to take military action to stem the ongoing turmoil in Venezuela. Earlier in the day, Pompeo said that Maduro was on the verge of leaving Venezuela and heading to Cuba, but changed his mind. Pompeo claims that it's Russia who intervened and asked Maduro to reverse his decision.
He was ready to go. He'd made a decision that we've been urging him to make for quite some time, and then he was diverted from that action by the Russians. We hope he'll reconsider and get back on that plane. We've made it very clear. We support the National Assembly, their interim president Juan Guaido, and we're supporting the Venezuelan people in their hour where it's time to get it right.
While Maduro has denied Pompeo's claims, it remains to be seen if Juan Guaido will ultimately topple President Maduro and restore normalcy in Venezuela. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The chaos in Venezuela will spill onto the rest of the world. The worst hit will be the global oil market. It's an oil-rich nation, and that's why it is generating so much interest among global powers. The world is now split into two camps. One that supports President Maduro, the second that supports opposition leader Juan Guaido. First to the Maduro camp that is led by Russia. It includes China, Turkey, Iran, Cuba, Bolivia and Nicaragua. Mexico has also recently lifted its opposition against Maduro. It has called for a dialogue. In the Guaido camp, we have the United States, Brazil, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, Peru, and leading European countries. As many as 50 countries have recognized Juan Guaido as the president of Venezuela. Essentially, this is a Cold War-like situation playing out between America and Russia all over again, and at the center of this is oil. As of last year, Venezuela produced more than 1 million barrels of oil. It was among the leading suppliers to the world. American sanctions have ensured that many countries, including India, do not buy oil from Venezuela anymore. As a result, production has plummeted to 750,000 barrels. It's a body blow to Venezuela's economy that is already on life support. So far, Russia's support has ensured that Maduro's grip on power remains. The Russians have loaned billions to the Maduro government. Last month, they sent 2 military aircraft to Caracas, along with 100 advisors, 32 tons of equipment. But the Americans want Maduro out by hook or by crook. Back in February, the Trump administration gave the opposition access to some accounts. These accounts belong to the PDVSA. It is the Venezuelan state-owned oil company. The PDVSA had parked billions of dollars of oil money in America, and now the opposition, led by Mr. Guaido, has access to this money. The Americans are not ruling out military intervention, but would prefer a peaceful transition, they say.
Military action is possible. If that's what's required, that's what the United States will do. We're trying to do everything we can to avoid violence. We've asked all the parties involved not to engage in that kind of activity. We'd prefer a peaceful transition of government there, where Maduro leaves and a new election is held.
It is International Labour Day today, and the day marks a celebration of the working class. Cities across the world witnessed rallies and marches, but Paris saw violent protests. Joining the annual trade union march for the first time were yellow vest protesters. They've been demonstrating since November against President Emmanuel Macron's policies. Starting off as a protest against fuel tax hikes, their protests have since evolved into a movement. They're pressing for what they call a decent standard of living. Donning their high visibility jackets today, the protesters clashed with the police in several parts of the French capital. Police resorted to tear gas firing to push back large crowds who had gathered near a metro station. Thousands of people also demonstrated in cities from Marseille to Toulouse and Bordeaux. Some 300 yellow vest protesters tried to storm a police station.
Les syndicats et gilets jaunes, en général, c'est le même combat. Mais là, c'est plutôt les citoyens qui disent stop. Mais nous, on le dit, ça fait des années. À part que le gouvernement ne nous écoute pas.
Qu'on essaye de se battre, qu'on essaye de se faire entendre et tout le monde. Les gens s'en foutent, les gens ne comprennent pas le mouvement. Pourtant, enfin, je sais pas, c'est simple quand même, on veut juste vivre normalement, quoi.
The government is not taking any chances. More than 7,400 police personnel have been deployed across Paris along with drones. More than 200 arrests have been made so far. These clashes come days after President Macron outlined measures to pacify the protesters. He made concessions, major concessions, including tax cuts worth around 5 billion euros. But the protesters weren't convinced.
62 ans et on s'en sort plus. Donc on est écrasé au niveau charge, au niveau les retraites sont diminuées. On Ah, moi, je suis parti à la retraite avec une certaine somme et là, je me retrouve avec beaucoup moins et on s'en sort plus. Donc, on veut que ça change, on veut un renouveau, parce que apparemment Macron a été élu pour un certain renouveau et finalement, le renouveau, il n'est pas là du tout. Ah, c'est même pire que ce qu'il y avait avant.
Halfway across the world, in Japan, it's a big day. A day after the abdication of his father, Joko Akihito, Japanese Emperor Naruhito has formally ascended the throne, ushering in a new era in his country. Here's a report.
It was a new morning in the land of the rising sun as Japan's new Emperor Naruhito formally ascended to the chrysanthemum throne, succeeding his father Akihito. His ascension was formalized in a ceremony that saw him inherit the imperial treasures. Naruhito symbolically received the 3 imperial treasures: a sword, a gem, and a mirror and seals. The symbols have been passed down through generations of emperors and are symbols of imperial power. The ceremony, which was largely dominated by male royals, allowed female royals to attend the second part of the ceremony, where the emperor was accompanied by Empress Masako in the State Hall of Tokyo's Imperial Palace. In his first address after ascending the throne, Emperor Naruhito expressed his desire for happiness and world peace.
In acceding to the throne, I swear that I will reflect deeply on the course followed by His Majesty the Emperor Emeritus, and bear in mind the path trodden by past emperors, and will devote myself to self-improvement. I also swear that I will act according to the Constitution and fulfill my responsibility as the symbol of the state and of the unity of the people of Japan, while always turning my thoughts to the people and standing with them. I sincerely pray for the happiness of the people and the further development of the nation, as well as the peace of the world.
The Japanese monarchy is the oldest continuing hereditary monarchy in the world. Legends dated back to about 600 BC. Born in 1960, Emperor Naruhito is a graduate of Oxford University. He became crown prince at 28. In 1986, he met his wife and now Empress Misako Owada at a tea party. They married in 1993. The role of Japan's emperor has changed significantly since Naruhito's grandfather, Emperor Hirohito, sat on the throne. Once considered the living embodiment of gods, the emperor has now become a largely symbolic figure. Unlike other monarchs, Naruhito is a symbol of the state rather than the head of state. However, the Japanese emperor wields no political power. Since each emperor's reign is marked by their era's name, Naruhito's ascension signals the start of the Reiwa era, meaning beautiful harmony. Hundreds flocked to the imperial palace holding Reiwa flags and banners, hoping to be part of the historic moment as the ascension ceremonies took place behind the high walls of the palace. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
With that, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas. Thanks very much for watching.